The knife moved slowly through the apple. One long, perfect peel curling toward the sink. He wasn't rushing. He never rushed. Especially not after 8 p.m. Behind him, the sound of a page turning. Soft, deliberate. She always read before bed. Not on a tablet, not on a phone. Just paper. Worn corners, second-hand stories. She sat on the floor, legs folded under her, back straight, the blanket pulled over her knees like it had always belonged there. They hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was careful, like a table balanced on one leg. Then came the question. No warning, no shift in tone, no build-up. Just this. Do you think if someone lost their kid, they'd still know them, if they saw them again? The knife paused, hovered over the fruit. He didn't turn around, didn't answer. He only looked down at the peel in his hand and realized he'd cut straight through it. Not every question needs an answer. Some just wait. If you've ever heard something quiet and couldn't forget it, Candle, leave a comment. Maybe someone else is carrying the same silence. He was not a remarkable man by most standards. Thomas lived in a modest, single-story home at the edge of a quiet town, where the trees leaned over the roads and the mail always came at 10:15. His neighbors knew him by the way he nodded, not waved, and how his yard never needed a second glance. He didn't go to church, didn't host barbecues, but if someone's dog got loose, he'd help catch it. If an elderly neighbor's lights flickered, he'd bring over a flashlight and batteries, quietly, leave them on the porch, and never mention it again. He was 58, widowed. He had once worked in hardware logistics for a private supply chain company that serviced mid-sized construction outfits. Retired now, early, not because he wanted to, but because after June died and the caseworker stopped calling, there just wasn't any reason to keep driving to the same gray building every morning. The caseworker, that had been 13 years ago. The baby had vanished into the system like a file misplaced on a desk too cluttered with tragedy. Hospital error, delayed paperwork, custody complications. Nothing criminal, just catastrophic. They told him she'd been moved, but no one could say where. He'd searched for 2 years steadily. After that, only on anniversaries. After the 5th year, he stopped talking about her. And then one day, 14 months ago, he signed a foster placement agreement for a girl named Lila. She was 12. Light hair, pale skin, and a quiet stare. She was polite, reserved, too mature for her age, but not in the precocious way some kids are. More like someone who had learned, too early, how to take up as little space as possible. No known relatives, the form said. History of multiple placements. He didn't think about the past. He just cleaned the extra bedroom, bought new sheets, and waited by the window the day they dropped her off. She stepped inside like someone crossing into foreign territory. No backpack, just a small duffel and a paperback novel held tight to her chest. She didn't ask where the bathroom was. She didn't ask anything. He showed her the room. She looked at it, nodded once, and sat on the bed. That was it. She called him Mr. Thomas at first, later just Thomas. Then, hey, if she needed something. Their days followed a gentle, unspoken rhythm. He woke at 6:03 every morning without an alarm, made coffee, washed the mug before pouring, toasted a bagel, always with butter, never cream cheese. Read the newspaper, the physical one, even if it was days out of date. He liked the feel of print. She came out at 7:12. Every day. Socks never matching. Hair brushed halfway. She made toast. Light brown. Diagonal cut. No butter. Always ate in silence. Eyes scanning the same book. Spine cracked to the same page. As if starting over made her feel safer. He packed her lunch. Not because she asked. Because he remembered what it felt like to be 12 and unnoticed. They didn't say goodbye when she left for school. Just a nod. When she returned, she placed her shoes precisely by the door. Lined up. Tied. Even on rainy days. She never asked for rides. Never brought friends. Never left lights on. He cooked dinner. She rinsed the plates. Forks all aligned in the drying rack. Evenings passed with a kind of mutual permission to be quiet. He read in his chair. She sat on the floor, sketchbook open, legs crossed, hoodie sleeves pushed to the elbows. That's how he saw it. The scar, faint, pale, curved along the inside of her right arm. He didn't ask. He remembered June, crying once in a hospital room, whispering, "She has a tiny mark on her wrist, like a little comma." He shook the memory away. Lila never asked about his past. He never asked about hers. But still, things shifted. She hummed, sometimes. Old melodies. Off-key. Soft. He never asked what song. Once, she fell asleep on the couch. He covered her with the throw blanket June had made, back when they thought life would keep growing. She didn't stir. The next morning, the blanket was folded perfectly at the armrest. Another night, he heard her laugh. A real laugh. Not loud, not long, but sharp and sudden. She'd seen something on TV, a dog wearing socks, and for a second, she was just a child. He didn't turn around, just smiled into his book. She started leaving her door ajar at night. Not wide, just cracked. Enough to let a sliver of hallway light in. And he started pausing there. For 3 seconds. Always 3. Long enough to listen for breathing. It felt like faith. Not in God. In continuity. In the idea that maybe this quiet, this exact, fragile, daily rhythm might mean something more than just passing time. That maybe she wasn't just in his house. Maybe she was slowly arriving in his life. And maybe, just maybe, so was he. It started with something small. It always does. A label. A question. A glance that lands wrong and lingers too long. This time it was a form. Lila needed a permission slip signed for a school trip. Simple. The kind with a checklist, a lunch note, and a line at the bottom for parent/guardian. She placed it on the counter without a word and went upstairs. He didn't see her expression, but he noticed how carefully she'd flattened the paper, how the edges were aligned with the grout between the tiles. Thomas stood over it for a long time. He read the details. Zoo trip, Tuesday, 8 a.m. pack a lunch. No money needed. Supervision provided. At the bottom, it asked for name, phone number, relationship to student. He'd filled these out before, but this time, his pen hovered longer than usual. He wrote, Thomas Whitmore. Phone number, relationship, guardian. Then paused. Looked at the word guardian, like it might bite. He scratched it out and wrote father. Then scratched that out too. He wrote nothing. Just signed his name and slid the form into her backpack that night without a word. The next morning, she didn't mention it, but she left the bag unzipped, the form poking out just enough that he saw she'd noticed. She zipped it shut without looking at him. That night, he made lasagna. She didn't say she liked it, but he'd seen her draw it once, a stick figure version, smiling beside a steaming plate. He figured that was close enough. She barely touched it. He didn't ask why. She ate 2 bites, rinsed her plate, and went to her room. The house felt suddenly larger than it was. Later, as he collected the dishes, he found a crumpled post-it on the floor near the trash. Just one line, scratched in her handwriting. Why don't we ever talk about her? He didn't need to ask who her was. The room didn't feel cold, but he felt himself shiver. He stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the window. His reflection was faint in the glass, blurred by steam, too distant to recognize. He whispered, mostly to himself, I thought I was protecting you. Then he turned off the water. The next day, he tried to bridge it, not with a speech, just a detail. At breakfast, he placed a faded Polaroid on the table beside her orange juice. A woman, young, smiling, hair tangled by wind, held a baby wrapped in a white blanket. Lila stared at it for a long time, then asked, without looking up, what happened to her? He didn't sit. He just stood behind the chair and said quietly, I don't know. She turned the photo over. There was no date, no name. Was this me? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She pushed the photo gently back toward him and said, You could have told me. He said nothing, but she left the photo on the table when she went to school. He kept it there all day. That evening, he waited on the porch. She came out after dinner, hoodie pulled over her knees, hair still damp from the shower. He handed her a mug of tea. She didn't like tea, but she held it. "I was scared," he said. She didn't respond. "I thought if I said it out loud, you'd run." "I don't run from things," she said, not angrily, just a fact. He nodded. A long silence. Then, quietly, she asked, "When did you know?" He swallowed. "I didn't. Not at first. You look familiar, but it didn't feel possible. Then one day I saw the way you folded a towel." She smiled at that, just barely. "And the scar," he added. She tugged at her sleeve, instinctively hiding it. He caught the motion, then looked away to give it back. "I thought I imagined it," he said. "I kept telling myself, it's just coincidence." "It wasn't," she said. He nodded. "I know that now." They sat until the light on the porch flickered on by itself. Over the next few days, they didn't speak about it again, but something softened. He started saying goodnight out loud. She started leaving the door ajar. He bought her a better sketch pad. She started drawing faces. Then came the school trip. He drove her that morning. She didn't ask him to, but she also didn't argue when he said, "I'll take you." Outside the school, other parents hugged their kids, adjusted jackets, handed over forgotten lunches. He just opened the door and handed her the brown bag. "Egg salad," he said. "No crust." She took it. "Thanks." As she stepped out, he called after her, "Lila." She turned. He didn't know what he meant to say. He just said, "Be careful." She gave a half smile, then turned and walked into the crowd. He sat in the truck for several minutes after, hands still gripping the wheel, keys untouched. He remembered the last time he'd seen a little girl disappear into a hallway. It had been in a hospital. Fluorescent lights, pale walls, and a nurse who said, "We'll just take her for a moment." He remembered the silence after that, and how long it lasted. That night, when she got home, she dropped her backpack by the door and handed him a sheet of paper. "Teacher says you have to sign this one too." He took it. "Read it." Another form. Field trip follow-up. Comments. Feedback. Parent signature. He looked at the line at the bottom. This time, no label. Just a blank. He signed, "Thomas Whitmore," then looked at her. "Is this okay?" She nodded, then picked up her bag, walked to her room. Before she closed the door, she said, "Thanks, Dad." Not loud, not dramatic, but it echoed all the way into the quiet. It didn't come in one moment. It came like dust settling, slow, quiet, steady. One morning, while folding laundry, Thomas pulled a hoodie from the basket. Faded green, too big for her, not one he remembered buying. Inside the hood, near the tag, was a tiny stitched name. Faint, worn by time, but still legible. L. Whitmore. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it gently and placed it at the top of the stack, like nothing had happened. Later that day, he opened the cedar chest in the hallway, the one he hadn't touched in a decade. Inside were June's photo albums, a baby blanket, and a sealed manila envelope labeled in his own handwriting. Hospital records. He sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping slowly through the files. Birth certificate, discharge notes, the name they gave her, Lila Grace Whitmore. He hadn't remembered the middle name, but now it rang like a bell. He'd seen it again just last week, on a school paper she left on the table. Lila G. Whitmore. He closed the folder, pressed it against his chest. He didn't cry. He just exhaled, slowly, like something had loosened after being held too long. He didn't tell her. He made pancakes that weekend, added blueberries the way June used to. Lila blinked at the plate. "You made these. Thought you might like them." She ate 3. He didn't say another word. That night, he searched her room while she was at a friend's house. Not to invade, just to confirm. Under her pillow, a drawing. A baby in a hospital bassinet. No face. Just a bundle of lines and shadows. Beside it, another sketch. A woman with windblown hair. He turned the page. A third. A man sitting on the floor with his back to a door. He didn't recognize himself, but somehow he knew. He put the sketchbook back exactly as it was. At the back of her closet, he found a box she never mentioned. Inside were old placement forms, name tags from shelters, one photo, cut in half, just the edge of a woman's face and the shoulder of a man. He never saw the full version. He closed the box and left it untouched. At dinner, she asked, "What was she like? Your wife?" He didn't blink. She was better at things like this. Like what? Talking. Lila smiled. Just a little. You're not that bad. He raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. I mean, you make pancakes. He nodded. I used to hate pancakes, she added, until you made them. He didn't say anything, but he took another bite. A week later, a letter arrived from the county archives, an automatic update on a sealed request he'd filed years ago, one he'd forgotten about. Inside was a copy of the temporary guardianship paperwork from 2009, a clerical copy. There in black and white was the original record of the hospital transfer when Lila had been removed for placement. He traced a signature at the bottom. June's handwriting. It was a copy of the last form she ever signed. He didn't show it to anyone. Just sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down, the letter curled in his hands like an old map no one could read anymore. He started seeing her more clearly after that, not as a foster child, not as a guest, but as someone who had never really left his life, just been placed elsewhere. He watched her read on the porch swing and remembered holding a baby to his chest in the same spot. He saw her tie her shoes and remembered the tiny fists of a toddler tugging at his laces. She was the same, and different, and home. But he never told her. She didn't ask. They continued. Same toast, same sketchbook, same quiet before bed. But he left the hallway light on longer, just in case. One night, she fell asleep on the couch, and he lifted her gently, carried her to bed. When he pulled the blanket up, she stirred slightly. "Dad," she whispered. He froze, but her eyes didn't open. She was dreaming. He didn't answer, just brushed the hair from her forehead and turned off the light. The next morning, she said nothing about it. Neither did he. But the silence between them had changed shape. Not distance, but something like understanding. A few days later, they went to the store. Just errands. Milk, soap, dry cat food for the stray that came by every Tuesday. At the checkout, the cashier looked from Lila to Thomas and back again. "She's got your eyes," she said. Thomas didn't correct her. Lila looked up, startled, then smiled. It wasn't a joke, or a moment. It was something else, something that didn't need to be explained. On the drive home, Thomas said softly, "They're your mother's, actually." Lila turned. Hers. She had that same look, especially when she was figuring something out. Lila didn't say anything, but she didn't look away. That weekend, Thomas took down the box labeled keepsakes from the garage shelf. Together, they opened it. Inside, baby shoes, a lock of hair, a pressed flower from their wedding day. Lila held each item like she was holding a puzzle piece with no box. "Did you keep all this for her?" she asked. He nodded. "For a long time, I didn't think I'd see her again." Lila paused. "Maybe you didn't." He met her eyes. "Maybe not, but she came back anyway." That night, she placed a photo of June beside her bed. Didn't ask, didn't explain, just left it there. And for the first time, he didn't need to say anything. He just stood in the doorway, looked once, and turned out the light. It was never declared, never revealed with drama or music swelling behind it. But something had shifted. The truth had entered the room, and no one had to say it aloud to make it real. It was the school secretary who noticed first. Mrs. Heron had worked at Roosevelt Middle School for over 20 years. She knew who got dropped off late, who needed lunch money, who wasn't sleeping, who was hiding bruises they wouldn't name. She wasn't nosy, just observant, the kind of woman who said morning exactly the same way every day, even if your backpack was falling apart or your shoes didn't match. She'd seen Lila come and go for over a year now. Always quiet, always on time, never with a parent, until this winter. Suddenly, she was getting picked up early for dentist appointments, dropped off with hand-packed lunches. Forms came back signed on the same day they were sent home. In tidy, slanted handwriting, there were small changes. Tiny but consistent. And then one morning, Thomas walked in to return a library book Lila had forgotten. He looked out of place, too careful in posture, shirt tucked in even though it didn't need to be. He stood at the edge of the office, book in hand, waiting patiently even though no one had told him to. Mrs. Heron looked up. "You're Lila's guardian," he said, then paused. "I'm Thomas." She took the book, nodded, and reached for the sign-in clipboard, but didn't hand it to him. Instead, she asked, "She doing okay?" He blinked. "I think so." "You don't have to know," she said. "You just feel it." He nodded once, then left, but something in her face softened as he walked out, not in pity, in realization. Later that week, at a parent-teacher night, Lila's English teacher paused when Thomas entered the room. "Mr. Whitmore?" she asked gently. "Yes," he said. "I wasn't sure if anyone would come." Thomas smiled, awkward. "Neither was I." She pulled out Lila's folder, gave feedback, grades, a few writing samples, then added as she closed the file, "She wrote an essay about home last month." Thomas looked up. "I didn't grade it. I just kept it. It felt more like something she needed to say than something I should evaluate." "May I read it?" The teacher hesitated, then handed it over. It was handwritten, titled in block letters, "A House That Stayed Still." It wasn't poetic, not fancy, just observant. It described a porch light that was always on, a man who folded towels the same way, a kitchen where things didn't move unless you moved them. It ended with, "Sometimes silence is just what no one has filled yet, and sometimes it's the only way to feel safe." Thomas blinked slowly as he closed the paper. The teacher didn't ask questions, but she said, "I think she knows exactly where she is." A week later, it was the neighbor's turn. Marla, mid-70s, crocheted everything, kept binoculars by the window not to spy, but to protect the neighborhood, she said. She and Thomas never spoke beyond mailboxes and weather, but this time, she rang his doorbell. Lila answered. "Oh," Marla said, surprised. "I was just dropping this off." She held up a loaf of banana bread, still warm, wrapped in a faded blue cloth. Lila took it gently. "Thank you." Before the door could close, Marla asked, "Did you knit that scarf yourself?" Lila paused. "Yes. It looks like one June used to wear." Lila tilted her head. "You knew her?" "Oh, honey," Marla said softly. "Everyone knew June. Then, you look like her too." Lila didn't answer, just nodded once, then slowly closed the door. Inside, she walked past the living room, straight to Thomas's office, set the banana bread down, then asked, "Who else knew her?" He looked up from his desk. "Most people around here, before she got sick." "Did she talk about me?" He hesitated. "Yes, always." "What did she call me?" He smiled. "Little Storm." She raised her eyebrows. "She said you kicked like thunder, even before you were born." Lila didn't smile, but she sat down across from him and stayed. The next time someone said your dad, it was at the grocery store. Lila didn't flinch. The cashier bagged the milk and said, "He always bring you here?" "Sometimes," Lila replied. "He don't talk much." "I know." The cashier chuckled. "But he always double bags." Lila smiled. "He's careful." As they walked to the car, Thomas asked, "You mind that she called me that?" Lila shrugged. "Do you mind I didn't correct her?" He said nothing, but his hand reached out briefly, not to touch her, just to open the door, and she stepped in. Spring came. The woman from Family Services visited for her routine check-in. She asked the usual questions. "How's school? How's the home? Any concerns?" Lila answered quietly. When the woman asked about her foster history, Lila said, "I don't remember most of it." "Do you want to?" "No." "What about now? Do you feel safe here?" Lila didn't look at Thomas. She just said, "I feel still." The caseworker blinked. Still, like I can stop watching the door. The woman paused, wrote something down, then said, "That's a very good answer." Thomas didn't speak once the whole meeting, but when the woman left, Lila lingered in the doorway longer than usual. She said, without turning around, "I never used to stay after people left," and walked away. One night, he found her in the yellow-curtained room, June's room. She was standing in front of the mirror, wearing a necklace he didn't recognize. He cleared his throat gently. "Found it in the box," she said. "Hope that's okay." He nodded. "It was hers, wasn't it?" "Yes. I didn't take it." "I know." She looked at him through the mirror. "Do you see her when you see me?" He took a step closer. "No," he said. "I see you." Then added, after a breath, "But she would have loved what you've become." Lila didn't respond, but she didn't take the necklace off. The last person to notice wasn't a person at all. It was the cat, the one that came by every Tuesday without fail. For months, it avoided her, skittish, guarded, but one evening, it curled up at her feet on the porch swing. Thomas saw it from a kitchen window, didn't say a word, just stood there, watching. Lila sat still, one hand resting gently on the cat's back, the other holding a book she never turned the page on, for over an hour. And in that stillness, something old, something fearful, something distant, finally left the house. Not with a door slam, but like breath let go. There's some truths you don't speak, not because they aren't real, but because they're so real, they don't need language anymore. Someone else sees it, and quietly chooses not to look away. It didn't land like thunder. It settled, like snow, quiet and irreversible. Thomas first noticed it at the hardware store. He was in aisle 7, trying to find the right size filter for the air vent, the same one June used to replace every spring, the one he'd ignored for 5 years straight, until Lila sneezed twice one morning and asked if dust could give you dreams. He picked up the filter, turned toward the counter, and saw the clerk, Dan, mid-40s, always chewing toothpicks, looking at him longer than usual. "Kid doing okay?" Dan asked, almost like he wasn't sure if he should. Thomas nodded. "Yeah, she's good." Dan tapped the register. "I remember when you and June brought her in the first time. She was just a baby, right?" Thomas's fingers froze around his wallet. Dan wasn't accusing. He wasn't even certain. He was just saying what came to mind. Thomas forced a smile. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, she was." Dan nodded, satisfied. No follow-up. But as Thomas left the store, the filter under his arm, he realized something. He'd stopped correcting people, stopped qualifying the story, stopped saying, "I'm just a guardian," stopped explaining the past like a broken receipt. People had started filling in the blanks themselves, and somehow he was letting them. At the post office, it happened again. Lila's name had been added to his box. Official. Typed. No more or current resident. The clerk, Janice, who'd worked there since Reagan, handed him a package and said, "For your daughter." He signed for it, didn't blink, but on the way back to the truck, he turned the envelope in his hands, watched how her name sat beside his like it had always been there. The next morning, she left the cereal cabinet open. It was small, but unusual. She always closed it. Always. He walked past it without touching it. Sat down, coffee in hand, waiting to see if she'd notice. She didn't. She walked in, hair a mess, socks unmatched. Picked up the milk, sat across from him, ate quietly. No apology, no fix, just presence. Like she didn't feel like a guest anymore. And he realized she wasn't trying to be perfect. She was trying to be real. And he didn't want to correct that, either. The real shift came when the school counselor called. Not for a warning, just a note. "Hi, Mr. Whitmore. Just wanted to say, Lila's been doing really well. Participating more. Making friends. She even signed up to help with the spring play." Thomas blinked. "Spring play? She's painting the backdrop. Said it was your idea." He smiled. Not directly. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it." After he hung up, he stood in the hallway for a full minute. staring at the wall, at the photo he'd finally hung up, the one of June holding the baby. The backdrop, he thought. Maybe Lila was painting more than just sets. Maybe she was painting space to belong. That weekend, they visited the cemetery. Not because it was a date on the calendar, just because the weather felt right. Lila brought a folded note. Didn't tell him what was in it. Just pressed it into the grass beside the headstone. They sat for a while, said nothing. Then, as they stood, Thomas turned slightly and said, "She would have been proud." Lila looked at him, face soft. "Of you," he smiled. "Of you." They walked back to the truck in silence, but it wasn't empty. Later that night, he found her curled on the couch, blanket up to her chin, watching a documentary about wolves. He sat in his chair across from her. Halfway through, she said without turning, "Did you ever think you'd get this back?" He didn't ask what this meant. He just said no, and she nodded, like that was the answer she expected. In town, people stopped asking, stopped squinting when they saw her with him. The man at the gas station handed her change directly. The woman at the farmer's market called her sweetheart. At church, which he hadn't attended in years, but visited once for a friend's memorial, the pastor greeted them both at the door and said, "We're glad you two are here." No one asked for paperwork. No one asked for truth, because the truth had already landed and stayed. One afternoon, Thomas walked past her room and saw something new. The yellow curtains, June's old ones, had been moved into her window. No one had asked, no permission. They were just there, and they looked right, like they had always belonged in that frame. He stood there longer than he meant to. Lila looked up from her sketchbook. "You okay?" He nodded. "They look good," he said. She shrugged. "They smell like sun." He smiled. That's what June used to say. He didn't need proof anymore. Didn't need files or DNA. The house told the truth for them. It was in the way her shoes scuffed the entry rug, the way she used too much soap when she washed dishes, the way she left 3 grapes on every plate, as if saving them for someone who never arrived. It was in the things that didn't get said, and in the things that no longer needed to be. A few days later, she found an old cassette player in the attic. It still worked. Barely. She brought it down, covered in dust, placed it on the kitchen table. "Yours." "June's," he said. They cleaned it together. Played a few tapes, static and lullabies and voices too distant to name. Then, one track in the middle, they heard it. A baby's cry. Then laughter. Then June's voice, soft and close to the mic. "You're so small, little storm. So loud. Just like your dad." Lila froze. Thomas didn't breathe. She pressed stop. Neither of them moved. After a long while, she said, "That was me." He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. She stood, walked to the window, pulled back the curtain, the yellow one, and stared into the yard, then turned around and sat down again. No more was said that night, but something had been heard, and neither of them turned away from it. Sometimes, when something finally lands, it doesn't break anything. It just stops drifting and lets you build around it. It started on a Sunday morning. Thomas was in the kitchen, same as always, pouring water into the kettle, tapping the jar of coffee grounds twice on the counter before twisting off the lid. Routine, unshaken, familiar as his own breath. He reached for the second mug, hers, but it wasn't there. Not in the drying rack, not on the shelf. He looked over and saw it already on the table. Full, steam rising gently from the surface. Next to it, a slice of toast, cut diagonally. Light brown, no butter. He blinked, then turned toward the hallway, just in time to see her walking back to her room, barefoot, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands. "Lila," he called, not loud. She stopped. "Did you make my coffee?" She shrugged. "You always do." He nodded, and for a moment, he didn't move. She had never done that before. Not because she couldn't, but because she'd never assumed she was allowed. That morning, she had. That morning, she'd woken up and decided the rules could shift. And they did. After breakfast, she sat on the porch with the sketchbook open across her knees, drawing something long and wide. He couldn't tell what. He walked out with a glass of water, placed it beside her without asking. "What is it?" he asked. She held it up. A tree, massive, centered on the page. Roots like rivers. Empty space above it, like waiting for something else to arrive. "Doesn't have leaves yet," she said. "Season?" "No," she said, still deciding. He nodded. "Smart to wait." She smirked. For a tree? For anything. She set the pencil down and leaned back. For the first time, she didn't pull the hood over her head when the wind picked up. That afternoon, she moved a few of her books into the living room shelf. Just 3. But he noticed. He didn't mention it, but he did slide one out later and saw her name, scribbled in the corner. Lila G.W. 3 initials. 3 people. 1 truth. On Monday, she walked to school alone. Not because he wasn't available, but because she asked. "I want to try walking." "It's cold," he said. "I have a jacket." He paused, then handed her the thermos. "For the walk back," he said. "Still warm at lunch." She smiled, and for the first time, he saw the same grin June used to wear when she'd get the last word. She left, backpack crooked, hair unbrushed, confident. He stood at the window longer than usual. The sidewalk curved gently toward the horizon. She didn't look back. When she returned that afternoon, she didn't knock before entering the office. Just walked in, dropped her bag, and sat in the second chair. "I want to change my last name," she said. He blinked. "To what?" She looked at him like he should know, then said, "To yours." He took a breath. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "You don't have to." "I know." He nodded. They didn't talk about it again, but a week later, he drove her to the clerk's office. She filled out the form herself. He just signed the bottom line. She started calling him Dad after that. Not every day. Sometimes it came out like a slip. Sometimes deliberate. Sometimes in front of others. The first time was at the pharmacy. The woman behind the counter asked, "And your father's date of birth?" Lila answered without hesitation. He turned toward her, surprised. She said, "I memorized it." He smiled. Later in the truck, she said, "You didn't stop me." "I didn't want to." On her birthday, he bought a cake. She never asked for one. He just did. It wasn't big. Chocolate with white frosting and 12 tiny candles, even though she was 13. She stared at it for a long time, then blew them out in one breath. He asked if she made a wish. I didn't need to. They ate in silence, and when they were done, she packed 2 slices in a tin and placed it in the fridge labeled, "Save for Mom." He didn't ask why, but he understood. Later that night, she folded a sheet of paper in half and handed it to him. On one side, a drawing. Him, her, and a woman in the background, faint like memory. On the other side, a list. Her handwriting, messy but intentional. Things I decide now. 1, I live here. 2, I belong here. 3, I'm allowed to stay. 4, you don't owe me anything. 5, I love you anyway. He looked up. She said, "You don't have to put it on the fridge or anything." But he did. That night, with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. The house changed after that. Small things. Her shoes left out instead of lined up. Her books scattered, not shelved. Her laughter louder. She played music sometimes. She cooked her own eggs. She left drawings on the stairwell wall. Not framed, not taped. Just there. Pencil smudges. Signs of presence. One morning, he caught her singing in the shower. Off key. Full volume. He didn't knock. Just smiled and walked away. At the library, she introduced him as my dad to a classmate. He didn't react. She did. She said it again the next week. Louder. At the community center. At the art store. At school. And each time, the world didn't break. It made room. One night, she found a letter in her backpack. Handwritten. Careful cursive. Not from him. It was from June. A copy of one she'd written to our daughter before the hospital lost her. He'd never known it existed, but it was in the folder the nurse had saved. In it, June wrote, "You were born in silence, but you were never invisible." Lila read it twice, then folded it again and placed it under her pillow. She didn't show it to him, but he knew. She stopped apologizing for crying. She stopped hiding when she was afraid. She started sitting beside him on the couch, without asking if he wanted company. She started answering the phone with, "Hi, this is Lila Whitmore." She started becoming someone who no longer checked for permission, because she no longer felt like a guest. One night, as he was turning off the porch light, she came up behind him and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me decide." He turned. "I didn't let you. You did it on your own." She smiled. "Still thanks for staying when I did." And then, very softly, "Happy first Father's Day." He looked at her. "It's not Father's Day." "I know." She handed him a card anyway. Inside, a drawing. A tree. This time full of leaves. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, and all at once, the people around them stopped asking questions. It began at school. Lila was in the art room, helping paint a mural for the spring showcase. A big project, city skyline, kids on bicycles, clouds shaped like questions. She was up on a step ladder, filling in the corner of a rooftop, when Miss Foster, the guidance counselor, walked in. She watched for a while, arms crossed, not interrupting. Then, when Lila came down for more paint, she said, "You've changed." Lila blinked. "How?" Miss Foster shrugged. "You smile more." Lila didn't say anything, but the next day, the mural had something new. A figure in a window, just a silhouette, holding a mug. Miss Foster noticed, and didn't say a word. At the library, Thomas checked out 3 books, one history, one poetry, and a YA novel with a pastel cover. The librarian scanned them, looked up, and said, "You're branching out." He smiled. She asked for something with dragons and heartbreak. The librarian raised her eyebrows. "You know the section?" He nodded. She labeled the shelf. The librarian paused. "She yours?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She placed the books in the bag carefully, like they mattered. Due back in 3 weeks, or whenever she finishes them. At the grocery store, the woman at checkout, Sasha, with sharp eyeliner and a warm laugh, scanned their items while chatting with Lila. "You want paper or plastic?" Lila grinned. "Cloth. We brought our own." Sasha chuckled. "Of course you did. Organized little team, aren't you?" Thomas smiled. Sasha leaned it a little and said, "She looks happy." He didn't say anything, but he made sure to pick the longest checkout line next time, just to hear it again. Then came the field trip. Permission slips had always been bureaucratic for them. Names, signatures, quiet tension. But this time it was different. The school secretary handed Thomas the form without a word. He signed it. She looked at the line that said parent/guardian name, read it quietly, then said, "It's nice to see your name and yours on the same line." He nodded. It took a while. She smiled. "Worth it, though." At the spring showcase, people started saying it more openly. "She's your daughter, right?" Thomas stopped saying foster or guardian. Stopped using qualifiers. He just said yes. Every time he did, Lila's posture changed slightly, not in surprise, but in comfort, like the words were a chair she'd been waiting to sit in. And now, everyone was pulling it out for her. One afternoon, they went to the local diner, the same one June used to love. Booth by the window, vinyl seats, milkshakes too thick to sip. They hadn't been there together before, but the waitress, Ruth, recognized him. "Long time," she said. He nodded. She looked at Lila. "And this must be your girl." Lila blinked. "Ah, she is," Thomas said. Ruth smiled like it was obvious. "Pancakes?" she asked. Lila nodded. Ruth wrote it down. "She's got your face," she added. Neither corrected her, but afterward, Lila said quietly, "She meant it." "I know," Thomas said. "You didn't flinch." "I know that too." The town started shifting, not because of a speech, not because of a paper trail, just because presence is a language. They were present, together, everywhere. Thomas went to parent meetings. Lila started putting his name on emergency forms without asking. People waved at her when she passed. Teenagers who never used to speak to her started nodding. A few even asked her to join their study group. And when she hesitated, one said, "It's cool. Your dad can pick you up after." She joined. She began walking slower through town, less defensive, less hidden. At the bookstore, she asked for recommendations. At the park, she read out loud to the cat. At home, she painted a family portrait. 3 people, 1 couch, 1 pair of hands reaching from the frame into theirs. She didn't name it, just left it on the fridge. Even people who had doubted before, social workers, former case managers, distant relatives of June, began to fade into the background. No one called. No one contested. No one said, "This isn't legal yet." Because something stronger than legality had arrived. It was rhythm. It was consistency. It was assumed. And sometimes, assumed is louder than declared. One Sunday, after the farmer's market, a woman approached them. She looked nervous. About 40. Long sweater. Tote bag full of carrots. "I'm sorry," she said. "You probably don't remember me." Thomas didn't. "I worked at the hospital," she said. "Back then." When her voice trailed off, Lila stepped slightly behind him. The woman's eyes softened. "I remember your wife," she said. She was kind, even when things were confused. Thomas nodded once. "She talked about you, about your daughter. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you found her." She placed a small bundle in his hand, 3 knitted bookmarks, then walked away. He opened the bundle. Each bookmark had a name stitched into it. June, Thomas, Lila. He didn't show it to her, but he left one on her pillow that night, and she never asked where it came from. At the 4th of July picnic, the mayor called out family names. 4 raffle drawings, watermelon contests, sack races. When he called the Whitmores, Lila tugged Thomas's sleeve. "That's us," she said. He stood. They walked up together. No one questioned it. The mayor handed them a pie. Strawberry. It didn't matter what flavor it was. It just mattered whose hands it landed in. After that, something shifted in how the town addressed them. Mail started arriving addressed to both names. Neighbors started asking her opinion on things, not just his. People stopped referring to her as the girl who lives with Thomas. Now she was Thomas's daughter. Sometimes even just Lila. And that was enough. One night, sitting on the porch, she asked, "Do you remember when people used to say, 'You're a foster kid?'" He nodded. "Do you think they meant anything by it?" He considered. "I think they meant distance. And now they just say 'your kid.'" She smiled, then whispered, almost like she didn't want to disturb the quiet, "That's what I hear now too." He reached out, and for the first time, she took his hand without hesitation. Presence becomes identity, and identity doesn't always need papers. Sometimes it just needs repetition, trust, and enough people to stop pretending they don't see it. That's what happened. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to know they weren't playing family anymore. They weren't. It started with empty seats. At the spring open house, the folding chairs were laid out like always, neat rows, white plastic legs scraping against the school gym floor. But 2 seats in the front row, the ones usually reserved for district liaisons and social service observers, were left untouched. No one asked where they were. No one offered to fill them. Lila stood beside her mural, explaining the cloud shapes and the choice of color. Her voice was calm, clear. Thomas watched from the back row, arms folded, smile easy. No clipboard, no nervous caseworker eyeing the crowd. Just him, just her, and no one waiting to decide if they belonged. A week later, an email went out to families in the district. The local foster placement coordinator, the one who had once called Lila just another paperwork shuffle, had resigned. Personal reasons. No press release. No handover speech. Just gone. Thomas read the line twice. He didn't say anything, but he noticed that Lila seemed lighter that week. Her walk looser. Her shoulders relaxed. She hadn't heard the news. She just felt it. The art teacher who once pulled Lila aside and gently warned her not to get too attached to her foster family stopped saying things altogether. Instead, she began asking for Lila's opinion on color grading, let her lead small groups, wrote Ms. Whitmore on her end-of-term report, never apologized, but never interfered again. Sometimes silence isn't absence, it's a retreat. The neighbor on 3rd Street, the one who once whispered to another, "That man's too old to be taking in kids," now nodded when she passed. Nothing more, just a nod, but the judgment was gone. She'd been seen too many times now, laughing, running, folding laundry on the porch. She didn't look like someone who had been placed. She looked like someone who had grown there. The lawyer who'd drawn up the original guardianship had once used the phrase, "temporary arrangement with review." She sent a message in May. "No need for annual renewal. Status is solid. System has shifted. Let me know if you want to formalize the surname." Lila never saw the email, but that week, she began signing her name on school papers in full caps. Lila Whitmore. No hesitation. The biggest change was quieter than all of that. It happened in the grocery store. There used to be a clerk named Angela who watched Lila too long, asked pointed questions. "You sure that's your dad? You got ID on you, sweetie? Is this food for your household?" That Angela was still there, but now she no longer asked anything. One day, she rang up their groceries, handed Thomas the receipt, and said, "Tell your daughter I like her backpack. My niece loves sunflowers, too." Then turned to the next customer. She hadn't warmed. She'd yielded. And in this story, that was louder than kindness. One night, Lila asked if she could invite a friend for dinner. Thomas paused. Of course. She looked relieved. Not because she was afraid he'd say no, but because she'd never asked before. That evening, a friend came. They ate pasta, talked about music, laughed about teachers. At one point, the friend turned to Lila and said, "Your dad's kind of funny." Lila rolled her eyes. "He tries." And just like that, Thomas was no longer a guardian. He was a dad with bad jokes. And in the economy of teenage friendship, that's about as real as it gets. The social worker assigned to Lila's early file was replaced. Not because anyone fought for it, not because a complaint was filed, but because the ripple had reached the higher-ups. A quiet call from a supervisor, a conversation in a beige office, a decision made over lukewarm coffee. Her case doesn't need you anymore. And just like that, another ripple moved through. Not to punish, but to clear space. They didn't throw parties. No balloons. No official notice. But people stopped introducing her as a foster kid. And began saying, "She lives with her dad over on Cedar. She's helping with the school garden. She's Whitmore's girl." The change came not in volume, but in how many people stopped looking for proof. One afternoon, she brought home a science award. Nothing major, just a small school certificate for a model of the water cycle that she'd built out of recycled parts. She handed it to Thomas without a word. He read it slowly. Presented to Lila Whitmore. No caveats, no asterisks. He didn't frame it. He just taped it to the fridge. She smiled, because that's exactly what June would have done. At church, someone left a welcome note in their pew. Just 3 words. "Glad you're here." No name, no signature, just placement. And sometimes, being placed is the thing itself. The last ripple was the smallest. Thomas received a letter from a family court 6 months after Lila turned 13. It read, "Based on long-term consistent care, established identity, and child preference, full adoption is no longer procedurally required for recognition of custodial legitimacy." He stared at it. No further action needed. No courtroom. No formality. Just a shift. Permanent, quiet, legal without noise. He placed the letter in a drawer. Didn't tell her. She didn't need to know. Because in every way that counted, she had already arrived. Sometimes justice doesn't come in loud reversals. It comes when the structures that once watched you turn away. When the ones who doubted simply stop showing up. When there is no applause. Just fewer interruptions. and the freedom to keep folding towels without looking over your shoulder. That was the ripple. Not revenge, just absence. The absence of doubt, the absence of monitoring, the absence of having to explain your own life to strangers. And in its place, presence, laughter, a house that now creaked with memory, not fear, and a porch light that stayed on because someone was coming home, not because someone had to prove they lived there. The house was quiet, but not in the way it used to be. Not the silence of caution, not the silence of waiting. This silence was something else. It was steady, full, like the pause before music begins, except the music never needs to start. It just breathes. On a Wednesday morning, Thomas woke up at 6:03, as always, but instead of walking straight to the kitchen, he paused outside her door. It was open, as usual now. The hallway was pale with early light, soft and wide. Inside, she was still sleeping. Pencil sketches taped to her wall, books stacked sideways, a hoodie tossed on the chair. He didn't go in. He just watched and thought, this room has been lived in, not occupied, lived in. He smiled and let the house exhale. They had dinner without speaking that night, not out of tension, but because everything had already been said. She ate slowly, methodically. He chewed thoughtfully, folding his napkin the way June used to. When she was done, she stacked their plates, and instead of leaving the room, she sat back down. 10 more minutes. No phone, no TV, just stillness. And he realized she didn't need anything from him right now. She just wanted to sit with him. That was enough. One evening, Lila turned off the hallway light herself. That had always been his job, but now she flicked it off and walked past him, barefoot, half asleep, brushing her fingers along the wall. He stood in the dark a moment and let the quiet settle, then went to bed. Sunday morning, she made pancakes. He walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and found her at the stove, batter already flipped, coffee brewing. "You're up early," he said. She shrugged. "You always were." He sat down, watching her move. She wasn't mimicking him. She wasn't performing. She was simply part of the rhythm now. A second instrument, long since in tune. They spent that afternoon cleaning the garage. No urgency, no directive. She pointed to a shelf. "We can get rid of this." He agreed. That too. She held up a box labeled Winter Things. He opened it. Inside, one of June's scarves. She touched it softly, then wrapped it around her own neck. Didn't ask permission. Didn't need to. He smiled and said nothing. Later that week, a letter arrived. It was from a school in another state. An invitation. Summer program. Art and design. She showed it to him after dinner. "You got in," he said, reading it twice. "I applied months ago. Didn't think I would." "How long?" 6 weeks. I'd stay in the dorms." He nodded. "And I want to go." He nodded again. She watched him closely. "You okay with that?" He looked up. "I'll miss you." She smiled. "I'll call." He didn't ask how often. Didn't need to. That night, she packed a few things early. He passed her room and saw her laying shirts into a suitcase, not folded, not pressed, just laid gently. He asked, "Want help?" She shook her head. "I've got it." An hour later, she came into his room and said, "I forgot how to pack socks." He laughed. They sat on the floor, folding together, and the silence returned, familiar, gentle. At the train station, she hugged him tightly, tighter than she ever had. He kissed the top of her head. "You'll do great." She nodded. "Don't forget to eat." He smirked. "I'll try." Then she stepped onto the train, waved once, and was gone. The house was quiet again, but it was not the same. It was the quiet of after, the quiet of knowing. He left her bedroom door open, not as a shrine, but because he knew she'd be back. And that stillness was no longer loneliness. It was memory. Days passed. He kept her schedule taped to the fridge, crossed off each day she was gone, made his own coffee, fed the porch cat, watered her cactus, Wrote her a postcard he never sent. Just folded it, slipped it into her nightstand, because he knew she'd find it, and he wanted the silence to speak first. When she returned 6 weeks later, he met her at the platform. She was taller, tanned, sunburned on one cheek. She carried a sketchpad thick with new work. She saw him and smiled. No wave, no rush, just walked up and said, "Hey." He took her bag. She took his hand, and they walked toward the parking lot without a single word of catch-up, because some stories don't need to be told again. They just continue. That night, she unpacked in silence. He reheated soup. They ate together, not looking at the clock. She pulled out one drawing, a field, endless sky, a tree with deep roots. She handed it to him. "I kept this one for you." He took it, traced the lines, and whispered, "Thanks for coming home." She looked at him, then simply said, "I never left." The next morning, the house creaked again. Floorboards stretched. Coffee bubbled. A drawer slammed too loud. Life resumed. But now, the silence between them wasn't a buffer. It was a bridge, something they walked across, without fear, every day. And when she slipped a post-it on his mirror that read, "I'm glad you waited," he didn't write one back. He just left a note there, until it curled at the edges. Stillness again, but different. Not hollow, not hesitant, just whole.